Доктор Пол Хорнби ќе зборува за трите начини за поделба помеѓу генетиката на канабисот и процентот на ТХЦ и CBD.
Dobar dan. It's good to be here in Macedonia. I've never been before. I'm married to a Croatian who I've been with for 30 years, but she comes from Albania, where I've been, but never to Macedonia, so this is exciting for me. It's also strange to hear my voice coming back to me this way. And normally I don't even hear myself talk. I'm a lab rat by trade, and I don't socialize much. I'm kind of socially inept, and I do lecture from time to time on this subject because I've been involved with it for quite a long time, and I guess I've become somewhat of an authority on it. I'm not going to take you into too much science today. I would rather keep it quite light and hopefully beg some questions from you later on. And I do hope that you're getting translations from my English, and I apologize for not speaking the language. Even though my wife has been speaking it to me for 30 years, I only pick up the important stuff. This is a bit of background because my career has really been based on opportunity. I have been able to study sciences for most of my life, and always mixed in with the science with high-tech instrumentation, like radioimmunoassay during my bachelor's degree, and NMR during my master's, and then on to GC, mass spec, and HPLC. These are instruments that virtually every lab in the world has, and because they allow you to detect, identify, and quantify compounds that make up a matrix. I've often said they made the mistake of sending me to India for a year during my doctorate training, because in India I was exposed to what they call Ayurvedic or herbal medicine, and I had been trained up until that point in Western scientific medicine, synthetic medicine, that sort of thing. And when I went to India, I was exposed to natural medicines, and I saw a lot of old people in India, people that weren't on heart meds or antidepressants. They were using natural herbal medicines. And my thinking shifted. And when I came back to Canada, I started paying attention to more natural medicines. And with my training in the high-tech instrumentation, I started applying that analytical expertise to ancient medicines. I don't have my notes here, so I can't remember what I had planned to say, so I'll wing it. This little bag of tea, called hemp tea, was sold in Canada in the mid-1980s, not for very long before it was banned. The fellow that made this tea actually made it from hemp seedlings, which are the young hemp plants, which he would gather and dry and put into this bag and sell it from a little shop in the province that I come from. And he had little old ladies coming up to him on the street and giving him a hug, thanking him for a good night's sleep after drinking the tea. He wanted myself to analyze it to tell him how much THC was in the tea, because he wanted to get it licensed by the government so he could sell it. I measured it. Indeed, there was less than 0.3% THC, which is legal in Canada, but there's no way the government would allow him to put this tea on the market. And with my human pathology training and what I knew about cannabis and the contents of cannabis medicine, it seemed to me that this was a very harmless, innocuous, useful tea that was illegal. And it kind of blew me away that this was an illegal product when it was so harmless. Anyway, this fellow introduced me to a woman that started the first dispensary in Vancouver, Canada, which is where they sell cannabis to people with medical need. And almost immediately I began applying the analytical instrumentation to the cannabis that was being sold in dispensaries in Vancouver. This is the type of instrument we used. I don't know if I have a pointer here. I guess not. This is an old HPLC. It's called, it's actually built by Hewlett-Packard, and which is now called Agilent. This is a dinosaur machine now. We've got newer ones. But this one in particular I love because it's a workhorse HPLC. It's a never-die instrument. It's always accurate if calibrated, and it does the job. I have two of these instruments in my lab. One was donated to myself by a local technological institute named BCIT, which I've told that I would mention in lectures because they were very kind to donate the instrument. But this is the instrument we use to identify the cannabinoids, which are half of the story in cannabis medicine, the cannabinoids. Now, over the years, I've built up a philosophy of what is medicine and what's not. Like I say, my thinking changed in India. And after 15 years of exploring cannabis as a medicine, I came up with this statement that drugs should be tested on the people that make them. My body is my laboratory. I experiment with cannabis orally, not very much with suppositories, but I understand that they're quite popular here. I just haven't brought myself to that sort of experimentation yet. But I really have problems with synthetic drugs that are made in a test tube. This has evolved over many years of studying them. Natural vitamin C, for example, is 6 to 10 times more potent than pharmaceutical-grade ascorbic acid. The natural vitamin C molecule is a mixture of 5 different molecules, not one. And it's the cofactors, the brothers and sisters of the active molecule that I believe are necessary to bring about an efficacious medicine. Can you imagine if we asked people to test some of the vaccines they make on themselves? This is the way we look at cannabinoids with the instrumentation. I can't find an arrow. Is there an arrow? Do you know? No arrow? Oh, there we go. This is THC acid. That's the most abundant cannabinoid in any hemp, any cannabis that we harvest. I was going to open this talk by saying that there are many words for cannabis. I use cannabis because that's the scientific name. But here it's called skunk. In Canada we call it AAA. That's high-grade THC cannabis. It's also called hemp here, which is another type of cannabis. There are more than 200 names for cannabis, and roughly the same for the male penis, so you can get an idea of its significance. By far the most abundant molecule in recreational, or skunk as it's called here, is THC acid. This is in the natural plant as you harvest it in the grow room or in the field. But you wouldn't just take a bud off the plant and eat it, because you won't get the cannabis effect. You'll get an effect, but it's not going to be the high you would expect from cannabis, because you have to heat it up first. When you heat up THC acid, it goes to delta-9 THC, Big Daddy delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, the one that all the researches, all the talk has been about, the psychoactive molecule. That's this one here. When you heat it up, this peak will go down and it'll come up here because you're knocking off what's called a carboxyl group. I'll get into that in a minute. What's important to note from this, what's called a chromatogram, is how big this peak is compared to these ones down here. This is CBD acid and CBD down here. The bigger the peak, the more of the compound there is. So the THC is far outweighing the CBD in this particular sample. This is what we call AAA recreational skunk high-grade cannabis. This is high THC pot. This is a show-off slide to show the UV spectrum of the cannabinoids. This is the THC acid here. This is how it absorbs UV light. This is the way we detect it. It absorbs a lot in the lower range of UV, more at around this is nanometers of UV light, up to 320 nanometers. This absorption of UV light is the way we identify the different cannabinoids. This is the CBN cluster, this is the CBD cluster. This is what's called the solvent peak. It's irrelevant to the cannabinoids, it just comes out with the solvent. Important, again, to notice here is the abundance of the THC over the CBD. Now, this is a list of cannabis efficacy, meaning the desired effect. Will it do what you say it will do? And cannabis is effective in treating all of these illnesses. That's why it's illegal. No? Where I come from, the pharmaceutical industry rules. They make up the laws that the government obeys for. The Institute of Health, or Health Canada as we call it, is pretty much ruled by the pharmaceutical industry that builds synthetic cannabinoids and molecules that are supposed to be effective on people. This is the efficacy of natural cannabis. The cannabis that grows from the ground, that you can pick the bud off, that grows in your hemp fields. This is the usefulness of it as a medicine. The petroleum people, the clothing industry people can make up their own similar list, big list of the usefulness of cannabis, and they will tell you too that's why it's illegal. Because of this competition, the pharmaceutical industry can't afford to have natural cannabis and people accessing it. That's my opinion, but I've been observing it for a long time. And if indeed cannabis is legalized, the pharmaceutical industry would lose its analgesic business, its antidepressant business, it's anti-inflammatory, and they can't take that sort of sock in the jaw. They make $500 billion a year profit, and that they are the major lobbyists of the American government. They lobby more than any other industry, and they essentially rule. Like I said in opening, I don't know if I went into any detail about it, but I'm a natural medicine guy. I like natural whole plant medicine made by plant enzymes. I believe that belongs in biological systems. And because of cannabis's huge efficacy, it's a great example of the power of natural medicine and its extreme usefulness. The greatest efficacy for cannabis, natural cannabis, is for pain relief. I love this slide. I stole it from the internet, compliments to the people that made it, but it expresses pain very well. And for 5 years, I had my laboratory in a dispensary in Vancouver and observed roughly 4,000 people using cannabis therapeutically. And 80% of those people were attempting to manage chronic pain. That comes from car accidents, on-the-job injuries, bacterial infections, many different ways you can be traumatized to end up in chronic pain. And I have witnessed absolute miracles in people, particularly when they ingest cannabis orally for pain relief. It's profound. I saw an old lady she took a bit of tincture and she put her walker aside and started dancing around in the reception room of a dispensary. She said, "I have not felt like this in years." And it was virtually instant, within a few minutes. So, in the usefulness of cannabis, it is extremely useful for people in chronic pain, but that also blankets into other neuromuscular disorders. A little bit of science here, which I'm sure Dr. Hanush went into, and Dr. Hanush I tremendously respect because he's one of the godfathers of all of this in the chemistry of the cannabinoids. He's not even looking at me now. I want to just talk, I've gone on ad nauseum about this in lectures, but a process called decarboxylation, which is extremely important to understand if you're making oral preps or tinctures or topicals where you're not going to burn the cannabis first. I talked before about a carboxyl group, which is this group right here. There's a carbon atom at every corner of this drawing. So there's a carbon atom here, 2 oxygens and a hydrogen. That's essentially CO2. And this is the weakest bond on the molecule, so when you heat it up, this flies off and you end up with activated THC. This compound binds the receptor, this one doesn't. It's like there's an arm in the way that keeps it from binding the receptor. And even when it does bind the receptor, it's only partial binding. It doesn't completely lock on. But the fact that it binds the receptor, in my mind, is just a fluke. The fact that THC from the cannabis plant binds the receptor in the human body, it just happened. But this is a hydrocarbon, apart from these 2 oxygen atoms, this is all hydrocarbon, as is the endocannabinoids are pretty much all hydrocarbon too. So this molecule looks like an andamide or 2-AG, and it interacts with the receptor. And we use THC as a to standardize cannabis medicine. We will say that a particular prep contains so many milligrams of activated THC or activated CBD, because CBD does the same thing. It also has an acid group, and it has to be decarboxylated. It has to be heated up before it can be ingested. This is to give you more of an idea from the chromatography. This is the spectrum of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That's the way it absorbs UV light. This is the THC acid, so they have a different UV spectrum. That's how we can identify whether our decarboxylation has been complete. And this is just to show you that within that chromatography where I showed you that huge THC acid peak and the small CBD peak, there are 80-odd other cannabinoids that are of lesser amounts, so you don't see them, but we can blow them up in the baseline with the computer. Just that I don't want to discount the importance of the other cannabinoids, although today I'm just talking about CBD and THC. I'm going to skip this slide because I want to go back to, this is typical BC high THC cannabis. High THC, low CBD. This is an overlay of 7 chromatograms of a hemp plant. High CBD, low THC. If you breed the two, you end up with what I call a 50-50 strain with high CBD, a good slug of delta-9 THC, and also THC acid. If you total these two up, they'll equal the amount of CBD, roughly 50-50 equal THC and CBD. Like I say, I call these 50-50 strains, and they're incredibly therapeutic, particularly for seizure disorder, chronic pain, dystonia, illnesses like that. Just to make that point a little more. So there's a very different cannabinoid profile between hemp and recreational pot. This is hemp, high CBD, low THC, recreational, high THC, low CBD, and then the 50-50. And I say that is written. I want to find that slide. Sorry about this. Oh, there it is. What is it? Yeah. Oh, it's not very clear. This is an overlay of what I call the three-way split. If you're getting into producing cannabis, hemp medicine, this is extremely important to understand that different strains of hemp have different profiles, and this is written into the genetics of the plant and can't be altered unless you're going to genetically modify it, which I will have to be dead first to approve. Anyway, this is an overlay of the hemp strain in red with high CBD, low THC, the recreational with high THC, low CBD, and the 50-50 in green with roughly equal THC and CBD. Now, the absorption of UV light is less for THC than it is for CBD, so its peak doesn't look as big, but when we quantify this, they come out to be roughly equal in amount, THC and CBD, in these 50-50 strains. Now, what's the significance of the 50-50 strain? That one we call Halley's Comet, because 7 years ago, a mother brought me her 14-year-old daughter named Haley, who at that time was having 10 to 16 grand mal epileptic seizures every day. She was always seizing. 4 days after meeting her, a hippie kid from an island near Vancouver brought in a strain of cannabis that he wanted tested because he wanted to sell it to the dispensary. And he sat across my desk as I ran this sample in front of him, and the CBD is the first peak to come out. It comes out at 6 minutes. And it started going up, and I started to get real excited, and the kids started to cry. And I'm not sure, I did ask him after, he said I was just having a real bad day, but I thought he was getting emotional because he knew we would have something that would help this girl with epilepsy. How did I know that CBD would help anyone with epilepsy? It was from the scientific literature. One of the oldest known therapeutic uses of cannabis is for treating epilepsy. So I guessed, and like I say, a few days later, this kid comes in with a strain with high CBD. I had it prepped into an oral prep, gave it to Mom, who gave it to the girl, and she didn't have a seizure for 2 weeks. They stopped. They absolutely vanished. They took her in for more EEGs, and indeed there was a significant reduction in seizure activity. And then she had one of her first periods, and she had a couple of seizures. 7 years, incidentally, she was 14 when I met her, wasn't expected to live more than a year. I escorted her to her high school graduation last year. She's now 21. She was in a special course, but she completed high school and no longer has daily seizures once a month when she has her period. If we could only rub those other ones out. But and also, along the lines of epilepsy, we recently began treating a 2-year-old girl who was having 30 seizures a day. We gave her a prep from the hemp plant with high CBD, and she hasn't seized in 3 months now, completely stopped. Thank you. It's not me, it's the cannabis. And incidentally, her grandfather is a state government ex-policeman, and he used to arrest people for cannabis, and now he is a full advocate for it. So we're very lucky to have him on the team. I won't bore you with this. This is temperatures that cannabidiol goes skyward at or it evaporates at. THC is a little bit lower. Incidentally, CBD will decarboxylate after THC. So if you're making an oral prep and you have the analytical expertise you want to make, I always look for how much CBD acid there is, and I'll decarboxylate it to the activated CBD. That means I'm pushing the THC over a bit too far, but I want to activate the CBD. And this is what are called trichomes. I'm not sure if Dr. Hanush went into this with you or not, but in these little blebs, if you look at cannabis under a microscope at the flower, you'll see these little, what people call crystals or sugar. They're actually little blebs that are on stalks. And within that little ball, that's where the cannabinoids and what are called the terpenes are made, which is the medicine of the plant. It's all in this exudate resin that comes out on the exterior of the plant. You could maybe extract trace amounts of cannabinoids from the inside of the plant. Most of them are on the outside in what are called trichomes. I'm probably stepping out of line, but one of the reasons I'm here in this part of the world is to teach hemp farmers how to collect these trichomes, because it's the first purification step of the medicine. This is terpene structure. Terpenes are extremely important to cannabis medicine. Unfortunately, to this point, I haven't had the instrumentation to measure them. It's highest on my wish list. Within a couple of months, hopefully, we will get the money to get one. But I'll just give you a little story on the importance of terpenes. I once made two preps. One I called the bald prep, the other I called the hairy prep. The bald prep had a known amount of THC. The hairy prep had the same amount of activated THC, but the bald prep didn't have any of the other cannabinoids, and the hairy prep had the cannabinoids and the terpenes. My body was my laboratory. I took the bald prep, and it wasn't very interesting. I'm not in chronic pain, so I didn't notice any pain relief, but it didn't give me near the effect that the hairy prep with all the terpenes, it gave me the full cannabis experience. So the point from that is it's not all about THC. The big illegal molecule is not really where we get our cannabis experience from. In my opinion, the euphoria from cannabis is from the terpenes, the aromatics, the volatiles of the plant. Where I come from, anytime somebody buys a bag of cannabis, the first thing they do is smell it. They're after the aromatherapy. There's a whole medicinal science around aromatherapy, and the essential oils of cannabis have been banned as long as the plant. Go figure. And I know many aromatherapists would love to have hemp essential oils under their counter or on top. There are terpenes that bind receptors. One called linalool is an anti-anxiety terpene, tremendously useful. I can go on forever about terpenes, but I'm going to keep this short. For the hemp people in the crowd, this is an overlay in blue of a high CBD Chinese hemp, and this is another Chinese hemp that has a high THC and a THCV, which we think is THCV. But there's virtually no CBD in this strain of Chinese hemp seed that we were able to get. I don't know if the Chinese, I'm sure they have analytical equipment, but I don't know if they're actually intending to grow this strain or not, but it was in a bag of seed that I got. But this is typical hemp here, and this is recreational cannabis, but both of these they're calling hemp in China. For the cannabis users in the crowd, often questions are asked, I'm too high, how do I come down? These are ancient antidotes, a lemon rind, lemon juice. If you're overdosing on THC, this will help. This is calamus root, pine nuts, black pepper. how much do you take? I would take a handful of pine nuts, a handful of black pepper, if you can stand it, a whole lemon. It'll help ease the psychosis due to THC. THC is what they call the psychotic cannabinoid. It'll give you the experience of fear, paranoia. I got to get out of here. I'm scared. An overdose on THC can scare the living bejesus out of a person. It can be the most frightening experience he'll ever have. If you do overdose on THC, know that eventually you'll come down. In about 4 or 5 hours, you'll be starting to feel normal again. But you want to avoid overdosing someone on THC medically, particularly on an oral prep. That's where it will happen most often. They'll take an unstandardized brownie or cookie. Next thing they know, they're getting high and they don't know what to do. First thing is be with somebody you trust and know that you will come down. No one has ever died from an overdose of THC. There's no recorded death. That's why I love working with it. Because the sort of person I am, my whole family would be dead, including the dog. I once read that Louis Pasteur killed off a number of members of his family doing experiments with bacteria. God forbid what would happen with myself. But I have overdosed many times on cannabis. I came down. There's no permanent effects that I know of, apart from I'm crazy all the time. But it doesn't cause permanent damage. There's been many studies that shown that people overdose on THC, they bounce back to normal. I've often called the world I live in the rubber bubble, because you push your hand out, it snaps back, you push your foot out, it snaps back, because on the other side of the bubble is legality. If indeed the hemp plant, cannabis plant, weed plant, marijuana plant, whatever you want to call it, is fully utilized, we have an industrial revolution on our hands, because everything will change. Medicine will change, petroleum will change, clothing, food, if fully utilized. This plant grows everywhere in the world because people took the seed with them years ago, because it's so useful. They even make brake shoes out of it in Germany. It is by far the most useful plant on the planet. That's why it's illegal. And that's because of greed. I'm not an activist, I'm a scientist, but I've been drawn into the activism over the years because I just find it insane that we have this useful plant and treat it the way we do. So I'm all for legalization, full utilization of cannabis. I do offer, and this is my plug at the end for my company, I offer analytical services. We've done some work for people in Slovenia, none from Croatia yet, or Macedonia. But you vacuum pack a sample, we only need 0.5 gram, ship it to Canada, and we can email you the results within 2 weeks for a small price. I can go on for days about cannabis, but I'm going to end it here because I know you guys have had a head full today of cannabis and you've got a lot to process. If you want to take it from me, cannabis is the most profoundly efficacious herbal medicine we have on the planet. We got laws around it which don't make any sense in my mind, but I'm a scientist, not a lawmaker. I do feel here in Europe there's a movement toward legalization. It's coming pretty fast. When I used to give lectures like this 15 years ago, half of the room would have dreadlocks. And now it's a completely different demographic. Welcome, and welcome to cannabis medicine, and let's utilize it. Thank you very much.